Good evening and welcome to Red Bank Regional High School. My name is Suzanne Keller and I am the supervisor of the Source and the Freshman Academy. We are thrilled that you are all here this evening for what will be an enlightening presentation and one we can all learn from. The Source at Red Bank Regional High School is a school-based youth services program. It is designed to help young people navigate their adolescent years, complete their education, obtain skills leading to employment or continuing education, and graduate healthy and drug-free. We are funded by the Department of Children and Family, Division of Prevention and Community Partnerships, the Red Bank Board of Education, and the Source Foundation, our 501c3 nonprofit. The mission of the Source is to remove all obstacles that impede the success of young people in our community. And we achieve this mission by providing the following services free of charge. Comprehensive counseling, which includes individual, group, and family counseling, academic support services, preventive medical, dental, and eye care, basic needs fulfillment. We have a food pantry in the school, recreation and cultural activity, employment services, educational presentations for the students, community, and faculty. We offer scholarship programs, a summer slam program for incoming freshmen, and we have a certified therapy dog on site who's loved by many. Please take a moment to learn more about us in the folders that you have been provided with this evening. I would like to thank everyone who has made tonight possible, the Red Bank Regional High School staff, WEforum, Rumson Public Schools, Monmouth Medical Center, and our guest speaker this evening, Janice Taylor. It is now my pleasure to introduce Tara Kelly, Vice President of Development, Monmouth Medical Center.
Thank you so much. Welcome everyone this evening. I am thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled to see all of you. Monmouth Medical Center is so happy to partner with WeForum and really to be part of these conversations because they're so important, as you all know and will understand a little more when you leave here this evening. On behalf of myself, we have Dr. Fisher, the chairman of our pediatrics here. We also have Eric Carney, the CEO of Monmouth Medical Center, Anna Burian, vice president, here this evening. I know many of you know our Dr. Goldfarb, who's here as well. So we have many representations of the organization here to really begin this conversation. RWJ Barnabas Health, our behavioral health program, is the largest, most robust behavioral health program in the state. I'm here to tell you that, unfortunately, over the past several years, we've seen a considerable peak in those that are admitted for mental wellness and health in the hospital. Just in 2019, we tipped over 2,700 people that came in and needed to be admitted. We have an incredible program led by clinicians, nurses, psychiatrists, leaders in the field that really do exceptional work dealing with what this is. It's an epidemic. So to be a part of a group that is really leading the conversation, a difficult conversation, but one that has to be had in the community, we're thrilled. Before I introduce Carolyn DeSena, I want to say that WeForum really came to us many years ago, and it's just been a wonderful partnership. And I know that there are many people here this evening that since its beginning have been leading the charge and a part of it. And I would just like to ask everyone, past and present, that has been a part of WeForum, to please stand for a second and be recognized. I know you're all here. Thank you. An incredible, incredible group of women that are really leading the charge in our community. Carolyn DeSena, who is also a trustee at the Monmouth Medical Center Foundation and the founder of WeForum, has really been such an advocate for this community, taking all the difficult conversations and bringing them to light. So, without further ado, Carolyn DeSena.
Thank you, Tara. Thank you so much, everybody, for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here tonight. I just want to mention a few things that WEforum, we're not about shaming and we're not about perfection. What we're trying to do is we're trying to educate the community and try to load up your arsenal of knowledge so that you can become aware of the potential pitfalls, so that you can recognize things in your children, in your family, so that you can prevent and hopefully do something about something that might be coming down the road. So again, we're not about perfection, this isn't about shaming, this is about having balance in your home. I'd like to actually introduce a few girls, young ladies here that were part of a presentation at the Rumson School at Forestdale Middle School today. Will the Wise Up Teen Advocacy Group please stand? Some of these women have been a part of the group for 3 years, and what they do is they take a topic every year and they learn about it, and then they go and they teach their peers and they teach younger middle school children. And they've been performing in front of 400 people, 1,500 people, and today they did a fantastic presentation about social media and connecting for life, engaging in real time, in real life, on an individual basis, and teaching these kids to put down their technology and to just start talking and being friends. And they did an incredible job. They did it in front of 400 students today. So I'd like to give them a round of applause. Thank you so much, ladies. I'm very proud of all of you today, so thank you. Please, at the very end of this, please make sure you stay and ask questions. Janice is an incredible speaker. I'm so excited for you to hear her. And I want you to know that on our website, which is weforumgroup.org, WEforum group.org, please go there tonight or tomorrow. We will have PDFs, and Janice actually prepared a document full of information, mental health related, social media related, that will help guide you through this issue. When you go to her document, I want you to notice there are multiple tabs, I think like 10. Every tab is a different subject with multiple sources for you to look at. So please do that, and it's also being filmed tonight, so you can actually go back and review it or share it with your friends. So without further ado, let me please introduce Janice Taylor. She's a tech pioneer, a social tech entrepreneur, an inspirational speaker, author, online safety advocate, healing mentor, mother, and advisor. With over 10 years in the tech startup culture and 20 years in the healing recovery research practice, Janice Taylor has pioneered the collision of the real life and digital fields. Early in 2009, Janice witnessed the changes in real life communities and how we were raising our children. These dramatic changes led her on a journey to trace her early experiences on the streets as a child conversing with addicts to witnessing the same darkness in the behaviors online. Immediately, she saw that psychologically, there were going to be devastating impacts in these newly formed social media spaces, and that children and vulnerable populations would be the hardest hit. A decade later, Janice's combination research with real-life women struggling with addiction to the social media impacts have developed into 10 major theories, holistic and scientific, that have created a perfect storm of a digital vortex. Janice pushed forward despite industry blowback and resistance in Silicon Valley to create a solution of her own. Using her extensive background in psychology, Janice was able to identify the addictive features in traditional social media. She sculpted a solution to combat them based on values, love, and purpose. A mother herself, Janice was able to create a platform that didn't separate and segregate families online, and instead inspired thoughtful conversation, bringing back heartfelt dinner table discussions. From the beginning, Janice was able to predict the present-day issues with social media plastering the front pages of newsstands around the globe. From technology addiction and predatory behaviors to data privacy and mental health impacts on our youth, Janice speaks regularly on how there are few solutions to these issues and why an entire rebuild is our only option left. Please welcome Janice Taylor.
Hi everyone, can you hear me okay? I have had a wonderful day so far. I've got to witness some incredible kids. Some kids already heard me speak once today and are here again. That's exceptional, rare. So I am from Canada, So I made it from British Columbia, where I'm from, to Toronto last night, but then of course with snow and delays, I was hearing that you guys had wonderful weather. We did not get that. It was snowing on the west coast, and then it was freezing rain on the east coast. So I was trapped in Canada for a little while, but we made it here this morning. So I just want to thank you for coming out tonight. I will try to make this as informative and engaging as we can. There's a lot of materials to go through, so I apologize if it feels heavy at times. We talked with the teachers today, and I could see them sort of by the last slide going, oh my gosh, this is heavy. So we'll try to make it as impactful as we can, but also that it's informative and also leave you with some solutions. The one thing that I will say, because I know there's some scientists in the room, some of this is based on correlated data. So some of it is based on correlating several different theories together, as opposed to saying this was the cause and effect of the relationship. The unfortunate part of technology and social media is that it's much as it is very new. So we don't have the longitudinal data that we really need so far. So some of this is based on anecdotal, and some of it is based on experience, and some of it is about weaving it all together. So for those that would like to debate the science of cause and effect, we can have that later. Or we can talk in 10 years when the data comes through. So I'll offer a little latitude on that. A little bit more on my background. Being from Canada, some of you probably know a little bit about Canadians. We tend to be known as nice. That's kind of true. So I'll say sorry for 10 times, probably like now, sorry. That's a little bit of our nature. But one thing that's most interesting about being Canadian is we really pride ourselves on community. And I grew up in Saskatchewan, is where I'm from, which is 5 hours north of Minot, North Dakota, is the city that I am from. It is frozen for 6 months out of the year. When I say frozen, it's frozen. Minus 40 Celsius tends to be a temperature that we're used to, with a wind chill that can get up to minus 60. So if you don't stick together, someone dies. That's kind of the message. If there's a car on the side of the road, you better stop, because someone may freeze. If you have any skin exposed, it will freeze. So that's kind of how I grew up. I grew up with just my mom. My dad was a chronic alcoholic, and so I spent half my life really on the couches listening to addicts talk about what they were going through. From the time I was 6 years old, I would spend half my life on the streets, and the other half I would go to my mother's house, and my mother worked 3 jobs, and my sister Shelley raised me, and she was 13. And so because of Canada during that time period in the 80s, when you immigrated to Canada, you had to serve a stint in Saskatchewan. They figured, well, if you're going to live in our country and if you can survive the winter, then you can move. BC is a beautiful place. I live there now. Lots of people from Saskatchewan migrate to other parts of Canada. So they send everybody that first comes to Canada, you go live in Saskatchewan. And if you can survive, then you're good to go. So when my neighborhood was families from all over the world, I was raised by a First Nation family. So we say First Nations in Canada. I think you say Native Americans. We say First Nations and Indigenous. So a family that was Cree raised me. I had families from Jamaica, Ukrainians, Polish, German, all in my neighborhood. And the common comment was, who's feeding Janice tonight? That's what someone would do. And someone would come over and feed me. And by the time I was 12, I was fully on my own. And so in 2009, growing up there again, being in Saskatchewan, I was taking my girls to school at the time. They were 5 and 2. And I noticed nobody got out of the car. And I also wondered why we were all driving, because we used to walk kids to school. Then when I got closer to the school, I noticed that the parents didn't get out of the car, and everyone was on their phone. And this is in 2009. And I noticed there was no hockey nets in the driveway. Well, in Canada, that's devastation. That's like next to a tsunami and a hurricane and no hockey nets. What are we going to do when the Americans play us in the Olympics? Like, we've got to beat them. That's the only thing that we ever win at. It was a devastating thing to not see hockey nets in the driveway. And I thought, well, what's happened here? And I went home. My business acumen at that point was real estate investing, and I spent 10 years in big pharmaceuticals. So I was aware of it. My first degree was in psychology, and I just had this eerie feeling that something was rotten in the state of Denmark. And I went home, and a girlfriend of mine said, I should go check out this place called Facebook. Now again, being in Canada, we were a few years later than everyone else had it. Everyone else in America had it years before we had. So here I am in Saskatchewan, it's 2009, and I open up Facebook, and I felt like I was on the couch in my dad's house, surrounded by everyone who was high. And I thought, well, this is going to go bad. This looks like this is fun, but this is going to go bad. I felt that the worst of us would eventually show up if enough of us came. That's what I thought. I also wondered who was getting paid. Because when you grow up poor, you know that nothing's for free. So if this is free, someone's making money. It sure isn't me, and I knew it wasn't anybody else I knew. So I figured someone's making money, and if they're making money, then they're no different than the drug dealers I knew as a kid. That's what I thought in 2009. Now, you can imagine my surprise when nobody else thought that. And so I quit my job, wrote Oprah, because that's what you do. Oprah can solve this. I wrote Oprah, and I said, this is a problem. I'm not sure what's going to happen with this, but something's going to go bad. And 3 days later, I had a call from the Oprah show. And that's how I got to Chicago. And I wrote Oprah my story. And that started my tech journey in 2010. And then I moved to Silicon Valley. And so that background and that experience, it was always with this prevailing feeling that I didn't feel like I was getting all the answers. And as a parent, I felt like there was something missing. As an entrepreneur, I thought something was missing. From the psychology background, I felt like there's something missing. What am I missing? I just had this nagging sensation. And so when I left my career, my life, and everyone thought, my mother said, you know, you could work at the government. It's a good pension. My mother, who felt that this was just terrible, that I didn't have a real job, she still tells me now that I could go work at the government and they have a pension, that I just felt I had to solve it. So this is a collection of 10 years of my work, trying to distill it down into a place that it's palatable. And this is a little bit of that story. For the last 6 years, I spend most of my free time working with the addiction community. It was for me, because I made it out, I felt I needed to go back in. And so going back in was the most important thing. Some of you may be familiar with Dr. Gabor Mate. He's a fairly renowned physician in Canada. He spends most of his time in the addiction community. And one of the things that I first noticed about this idea of social media and addiction is that we were getting lost in a semantic debate about what addiction means. And I thought, oh, great. So now we're going to debate that. So that means we may not get here to solve the problem. And I thought that that was asinine. I thought, well, let's get a definition that we can agree. And so this is the one that, for this talk, anyway, I'm going to pick. A hurt is at the center of all addictive behaviors. So growing up, when you're surrounded by those, and many of you probably have your own stories, you know that it's often our early experiences in our child trauma that ever have us choose a life of drugs, alcohol, working on the streets, or anything else. We're always running from something. And what we're often running from is pain. That's really at the center of addiction. The pathway we choose, whatever that is, if we boiled it right down and come right down to our center, that's really what's at the center of it. So social media eroding our real life communities. Can I say that? Does anybody agree with this? Anybody disagree? Good. We're all on the same page. Fantastic. So these statistics are just some of them. There is a lot coming out now. Gene Twenge had an amazing article that came out. There's a lot of data. I tried to distill it down. There is data that's doing a lot of correlation. Again, not cause and effect per se, but there are some definitive linkages that are going between it. And I really believe as a parent, I don't know about you, I have a 16 and 12-year-old. I'm worried. I worry all the time. I'm seeing what's happening now. I think that this data and this information, it's here. The one thing that I will say, that even when we work in the addiction community, the very first step is to admit that we have a problem. That's the very first step. You can't get better, you can't heal, unless we admit we've got a problem. Doesn't matter which side of the fence we're on, we have to admit that we have a problem. And Houston, we have a problem. So when I started to look at these spaces, what I noticed was that it seemed to be a lot of ego activation. And when we think about the ego and we think about what happens in ego activation, if we boil that down, we often know that it's actually trauma activation. And so when I was looking at the places, primarily social spaces, so those places where whole groups of humans go and talk, that's kind of social. That's what makes us human. That's why we're not cows. Because although cows do migrate in Saskatchewan, they really do spend a lot of time together. I'm not sure what they say, but I think they have their own language. You spend enough time with a lot of cows in Saskatchewan and you think it's a secret society. I'm pretty convinced of it. But for the most part, we as human beings are defined by our ability to feel, to have emotions, and to socialize. We like to social. We're social creatures. So when I started to look at this, so all these different places that we could go, I saw it like a tornado, like a vortex. Like once I got in, I couldn't get out. And if I try to get out, I got something else pulling me back in. And just when I try to go, I'm pulled back in. I started to feel that this whole thing was really a vortex. So you'll hear me refer to it as a vortex. The other thing that seems so fascinating to me was the loss of time. Now, how many people open up their phone and then can't believe how long they've been on it? Happen to anyone? How many of us say, oh, I'm just going to go check X, and then before you know it, what's happened? The vortex, another link, and then before you know it, you've been there 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 3 hours, 5 hours. Happen to anyone? Everyone? Does everyone have that? You know, Eckhart Tolle is actually based in Vancouver. Does anyone know who Eckhart Tolle is? I think you guys say Tolle. We say Tolle. You know, it was really interesting reading just his book, The Power of Now. He talks specifically about time. And so when I was reading the book, I was thinking about the vortex. And I thought, when I go into the vortex, I'm either living in a past that I can't change, with high school people I once knew, with a life that I used to have, or I'm in there wishing I was somebody else. So I'm in there wishing in a future that if I just stay longer, I will become X. Now, in both cases, if I'm living backwards or I'm living forward, I'm actually not present. And if I'm not present, by definition, when you meet with addicts, many addicts don't want to be present in their bodies because they don't want to feel their pain. So if we're not present, then isn't that also the definition of addiction? Because then we're not present in our lives, and we're missing stuff. And I am as guilty as the next person with this. My 12-year-old will eagle-eye me from the basketball court as soon as that phone comes up. She'll be like, mm-hmm. I'll be like, oh, trying to put it away. We're all guilty of it because then we're not present. So all of that led me to these theories, these ideas. Some of them are old. Some of them I think are still relevant. Some of them you may or may not agree with, and that's okay too. It was really to understand what was happening. So your California Surgeon General in California, Dr. Nadine Burke, has actually made her platform early childhood trauma. That is her whole platform, adverse child events. So after all of these years of study, what I noticed is that I haven't really met a human yet, regardless of age, that doesn't have some trauma or pain in their body. That some place where they just don't feel that they're worthy. Some place where they don't feel good enough. Now for kids, when they go into these spaces, it's a haven of that. And for us as adults, we also go there with the same theory. And in thinking about it, more than 34 million US children under the age of 18 are suffering from some adverse child event. And it shows up in your classrooms, it shows up in how they learn, it shows up in their behavior, it shows up in how they feel. And unfortunately in social media, it accelerates everything. It's like putting gasoline, salt in a wound, steroids into that wound. So now, if we just were dealing with adverse child events, I'd say, okay, how are we going to manage this? But the fact is that each one of these theories are threaded together. It's a web. That's why it's called a web. They don't exist independent of each other. They exist in a counter-dependent way. So you take a child who has an early child event, adverse event, and then we apply Pavlov. The doctors in the room remember Pavlov. I'm not sure if was he ever arrested for any of the things he did? No, I don't know. Pardon?
Only rewarded.
Rewarded for it. Okay, so when I was living in Silicon Valley, the thing that was most fascinating to me was how this was celebrated. Now, when I did my psychology degree, you went through the different schools of thought that meant that the next school of thought proved the other school of thought that maybe that wasn't always so good. And so when I started to look at the world of technology, and particularly social media, this was everywhere. Everywhere, still is. And the thing that was most interesting about this is the fact that it's there to predict your behavior. Behavior psychology is basically there. Can I predict this behavior if you do this? Basically, it's predictive in its nature. One of the main things that you learn when you're building a tech company in Silicon Valley in this country is your technology better be predictive. And the more predictive, the better. And the better your data is that predicts the behavior, that continues the behavior, the better it can be. The more money you get from venture capital, the more it's valued because you need to predict that that behavior will happen every time that they come into your system. Now, as a parent, I was like, oh my God, if I could predict my daughter to clean her room, this would be fantastic. If I rang the bell, would she clean the room? You know, if I rang the bell twice, would she do the dishes? I was like, we all want some level of predictive abilities, but not when it comes to these spaces. There's something from the past. So, looking a little bit at this, we do get to pick on your president just a little bit because I'm Canadian. You know, we get to pick on him just a little bit. But one of the things from this point of view was the fact that it wasn't surprising to me. Living in Silicon Valley, they have a rule: build technology so that a 6-year-old can do it. So all the technology that you use from getting in to trying to get out, a 6-year-old should be able to do it. Motor functioning wise, swipe left, go in. Now we all love, as Gen Xers, that it was so easy to do because we were all learning it with our kids, correct? Do we have Gen Xers in the room learning technology with their kids? We were all learning it at the same time, so we were like, thank God this is so easy. This is nothing like record when you have to like record on the answering machine. You know, the VHS. VHS kids is where we would watch movies on VHS. But when it came to our kids and then building this, I wanted to understand that if it built on this part of the motor function, would it also activate our 6 to 8-year-old childlike selves emotionally? If it does this, does it counteract to this? Now, no one's really drawn that loop, but for me, I was like, okay, we're building this for 6 to 8-year-olds. Does that mean that the world shows up as a 6 and 8-year-old? Now, not to pick on your president, but there's some really good data that would suggest that some days, maybe. Some days, maybe so. You know, that part of the psychology shows up. Now, again, we're threading these theories together, so then now we're going to talk about dopamine. Now, we hear a lot about dopamine. That is one area, I think, of science where people are like, can we measure this? We can see it in the brain, so therefore, this is where we're going to focus our attention. Now, it is a huge part of this whole system. It is built to fire that. There is lots of studies that talk about that. But we cannot look at the dopamine portion of this, what we call the dopamine trickle. We cannot look at that without looking at all the other theories that compound on that at the same time. So it's not in isolation. The other thing when you are talking about gaming, do we have boys here that game? Yes, we've got some gamers. You know, the gaming, the World Health Organization has said that this is a potential mood disorder, that it's in the mental illness component of it. But it's again, there are some studies that say that it's good, that there's a certain amount of this that is good. So we don't want to say that it's all bad. But what we're talking about is a system. It's not in isolation. So we have to look at digital, and particularly social media, as a full system. It is not isolated events. And the problem is, because of the data, we're trying to extract these things out and separate them. You can't. It's all interwoven. So we were talking today at the school, I'm not sure about this here in the United States, but in Canada, there's more and more kids entering the school system unable to read, unable to form sentences, verbally not able to communicate. And in particular, some of the studies in Canada have pointed to the lack of parent conversation with their kids. the lack of human touch from parents to kids, the lack of good old-fashioned conversation around a kitchen table that used to happen. A lot of this kids used to learn just because there was nothing else to do but to ask your parents questions. And we used to have major conversations, and we used to read real books, like actual books, not on a tablet. We'd touch a book. We'd point at the pictures, we'd feel. You know, you could smell them. There was a lot of that when we were growing up that we thought were just whatevers. Now we're starting to see that those are actually really, really big impacts in how kids are coming into the school system. And for us as parents, I'm a parent too, this is not to point fingers at any parent. We're all trying our best with the system in a vortex that we did not see coming. We did not see this coming to this degree. And I think we're all trying to do what we can. But there are some things that are just old that are still just darn good. Like they're just good old-fashioned good for you. Fresh air, dinner at the table, you know, kids learning to actually do dishes, you know, things that we never took, you know, that we took for granted actually created a lot of human connection. One of the other interesting parts of this too is that we're starting to see that a lot of new mothers are on their phones while they're breastfeeding. That is a rising issue. So while they are breastfeeding, they are on their phone scrolling, missing the human eye contact with the child, missing that bonding time. And it is an issue. So again, when we look at this external approval versus internal, one of the things that I will speak to when it comes to this is the fact that most of what kids get now relies on an external validator. Everything else is lying outside of themselves. They're not sure about who they are inside. They don't even know how to hear that voice. They don't experience boredom, like true boredom. Again, we had a lot of boredom in my day. But we learned how to hear ourselves. We learned to check in within ourselves. We learned to go inside. Now everything is external. Do you like how I look? Do I wear this? Like that? Look at me here, now I'm here. Here's my food I'm eating. Here's the bus I took. Nobody cares, by the way. FYI, no one cares what you eat. All they want to know is if you're going to get fat. And they hope you're fat if you're skinny. True story, even the grown women. Grown women are just hoping, I hope she gets fat from that. I hope she gets real fat because I'm slugging it out here in my Uggs and sweatpants and these Lulus are actually splitting. True story. So grown women, we are responsible as well to teach our kids this. If we can't be alone with ourselves and check in, neither can our kids. Some of you are familiar with Gordon Neufeld. He's also a very well-known Canadian. He wrote a book called Hold On to Your Kids. And his book is so fantastic because he actually believes that parents are more important than peers for longer than we think. And one of the things that was most fascinating to me being in the tech industry is how much stuff is put out to parents that tell parents to put their kids on technology. How many parents have heard that your kids should learn STEM? Everyone should learn STEM. Everyone should be in STEM. Everyone should learn to code. Can I just tell you that I disagree? I ran a tech company. I raised $8.5 million. I hired 10 developers, and I had artists, writers. I had marketing, old-fashioned marketing. I had to teach people to sell, to communicate, to talk. There was still all the other skills that was necessary, not just those that could code. Coding is only one part of the whole puzzle piece. These are still companies. They still require math. And yes, spelling is important. I'm sorry, I just hate the fact that no one can spell anymore. What happened? I know that there's spell check, but still there's Canadian. We put U's in neighbor. We do. So when we are now putting all of this together, what this all comes down to is we actually create a form of codependency. So we've created now codependency in our kids with the technologies that they're in. And so have you. You're now going back into that vortex. Now this is the drama triangle. Now not to pick on your president, but sometimes I think he's victim, martyr, and perpetrator in one tweet. Like sometimes I'm like, he's full out like gonna go like do something terrible. The next time I feel bad for him. Suddenly he makes me convinced that people are mean to him here. And then all of a sudden he's martyring things out. So he can literally live in this triangle within a given span of about 10 minutes. Now, the only reason why I can bring him up because it's such a stark contrast, but it happens to all of us. You will be commenting on someone's post and the next minute you're lecturing them. And then you're turning around and someone comes onto your post and lectures you and then you're the victim. And then you're like, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go out and tell everyone. Like, that's what we do. Our wounds are activated. Our early child experiences are activated in these experiences. Remember, it's a vortex. It's meant to keep you there. So it's not going to protect you, unfortunately, from yourself. It's not there to heal you. It's not there for you to feel good. I'm sorry, I looked. I've spent 10 years like, okay, there's got to be something good. There's got to be something. What am I missing? What am I missing? The way that it's currently built, it's not built for that. So this is going to be touchy. There is a new trial that's coming out in the United States that specifically is talking about the decrease in gray matter from pornography use. It is a huge trial. It is actually talking about the brain scans from early pornography use that this gray matter is going down. So there's a biological impact, let alone the actual impact of it. What it pelts into the brain, when it's appropriate for children to see that. We used to have rating scales on movies for a reason. When the internet first came in, what people don't realize is that 65% of the internet is porn. 65% of the internet is porn. The very first commerce site was not Amazon, but it was a porn site. Pornographers figured out how to sell porn in the internet before Jeff Bezos did. He doesn't tell people that. He does not tell people that that's the truth. He actually figured it out. The pornography industry figured it out. And so when we're thinking about this is that the fact that before the age of 11, our kids are seeing this, and they're not seeing what we knew in the old days with the magazine in the shopping store that had the plastic, and we'd see you all, and then the man would go up to the thing and he'd pretend that no one saw him buying the magazine. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about very violent pornography. Most of the pornography that is there, like all pornography, is creating a very, very huge amount of a rape culture that it is creating where we actually think that these behaviors are normalized because kids are seeing them before they have an understanding of what it means. But it's already changed their brain. It's changed their relationships. It's changed how they see girls. It's changed how girls see boys. It changes everything. So obesity. This is the World Health Organization just came out again and said that more children will die from obesity than starvation in the world. That was surprising to me. I didn't know that. I didn't think about that. But obesity is everywhere. It's certainly in Canada. I know that it's here. Over the last 10 years, we've seen a rapid rise in this. We're seeing kids not going outside, not in free play, organized play, but not free play. Not outside moving. We're doing a lot of sedentary activities. And I would say even as us as adults, we're doing that as well. So this is also on the rise. But again, if we start threading all the theories together, it's not a surprise that this is the result. This one is a little bit controversial because some people say, well, the Toltecs, how do we know that they really said that? Has anybody heard of the book, The Four Agreements? I love that book. What I thought was so interesting about it, when you take out some of the pieces of information in it, years ago, the Toltecs down in the Mayan, I think it's a Mayan, right? Is it the Mayan the Toltecs were? They talked a lot about coming together and talking about how civilization would be impacted. And one of the things that was so interesting about it is they took all the different disciplines around a table and they said, if you could find out like 2 things, can we find 2 things that we can agree on, that we as a society can say, okay, these are 2 things that we should really say, okay, if these things happen, not good. They said that fundamentally they felt that the one thing that people feared the most was that they believed that they were not worthy. But the ultimate fear for all of us, if you boil it right down and you get right to the core of who we are, is that we ultimately believe that we're not worthy. We're not sure we're worthy of friends. We're not sure we're worthy of love. There's a little part of us that kind of doubts who we are. And if that fear gets inflamed, it shows up in our social media spaces. And then that fear actually controls us. The second thing that they said we should really be worried the day that a society is ruled by gossip, because we won't know what is true. We have some fine doctors here. They probably did their research at a time that it was clear what was good, what was not. It was clear that if something was reported in the Times, hopefully it was true. I don't know. Now we don't know. So we live in a pervasive fog called the mitote. We don't know what is true, and we don't know what is false, so we live in a fog. Now, if you spend any time in the addiction communities, you know the one thing that they always say? They're just not clear, it's this fog. I don't know who I am, I don't know what I'm supposed to be, I guess I'll be high. Because fundamentally, they don't believe that their life carries any value. And if they don't believe that their life carries any value, then they don't believe they're worthy of love. And if our kids don't believe that they're not worthy of love, and they go into these spaces, somebody other than you is telling them something that they need to hear. And you will not matter then. And that all comes tumbling down. We had a saying in Saskatchewan, because we didn't have hills, we said poop rolls downhill if we had a hill. So therefore we'll all live in the mud because we didn't have any hills because it's so flat in the prairies. So all of this culminates now into what we are seeing, probably in your doctor's offices, probably seeing everywhere, is that there is a mental health epidemic. And it's an epidemic. You can talk to a 9-year-old now and they will tell you about their anxiety and their bipolar disorder and that they are personality disorder. They will tell you about the drugs that they're on. Now, Gabor Mate is quite controversial in Canada, but he is a medical doctor. And he has an opinion, it's his opinion, that less than 5% of anything that we are treating with drugs are the only biological ones. 95% of this is all emotional. We are disconnected. We're not in our bodies. We're not in our spirit and our soul. We're not having dinner. We're not looking. We don't say hi. Someone got mad at someone at the airport for talking the other day. I was like, they're talking. What do you mean you're mad? You're like, well, he's disrupting my game. I'm in an airport a lot. Airports, everyone gets mad when people are talking on the phone. Do you notice that? I'm like, when do we get angry with talking? It disrupts us. This, for me, the one thing that we go to the number of the 200% increase in suicide rate in children 10 to 14. Now, we can debate about the statistics. We can debate about where they came from. Was it a big enough sample? As a parent, I'm not sure about your community, but in my community, we had 5 kids last year. You know, I'm not sure about your community, but it is happening. Younger and younger, more girls now than boys. More girls are committing suicide now. That wasn't the case a decade ago. There's a really great article by Jean Twins. She's a professor from the University of San Diego. Some really, really great data there that really points to that. And she specifically points out that it is in social media. So after all of this, do we have any Brené Brown fans here? Yeah. You know, she's considered a shame expert. You know, when we have all of this now that is compounded, that is happening in these spaces, when we enter our lives now, we are in this cycle of shame and blame. I can assure you that most kids today feel a lot of shame. The vortex is built on shame. Somewhere in some point of their day before they come to you, they have felt ashamed. And so then we turn around and we blame. So then as parents, we feel the same way. We're in the same spaces, so we feel shame. I'm not doing this well. Oh gosh, there's that Sally getting those Lulus as I eat my donuts. You know, these are the things that we end up shaming ourselves for, and then we turn around and blame, and that creates this vortex. And then we go to our teachers, and we want our teachers to solve it. So then because we feel shame because of what's happening, we go and we blame them. And it continues, and it continues, and it continues. But it's all a manifestation of the same early pain. Has anybody read Homer's Odyssey? It's been a long time. So every once in a while I'll like stumble upon something, and I think everything is now pointing me to this direction.
Unknown caller.
Oh, you should answer and say hi. Just say hi, tell him he should be here. This was really interesting to me. So just to tap into a little bit of philosophy. You know, whether we agree with religion, philosophy, because it's over in the soft sciences or not, there is always some really interesting clues. This clue for me was so interesting. So Ulysses goes on this voyage, and he comes up to an island. And he's at the island, and he noticed that all the ships are parked at the island. And he's on his long voyage. He's trying to make his way home. And he notices that all these ships are on the island. And he goes onto the island, and he notices that there's different people in different spots. And he gets this feeling that perhaps they've been there a long time, but they don't know that they've been there a long time. And then all of a sudden, people start coming out of the trees and said, here's a lotus flower. Here's a lotus flower. Here's a lotus flower. And Ulysses is going, what is this lotus flower, and why am I all here? And they've got some guy in the corner, and he's preaching away. And he says, everyone, back on the ship. Get on the ship. So they get onto the ship, and he notices that all the ships are barren. Nothing left on them. They've been totally pillaged by pirates. At the end of that, he said, be careful of the lotus eater, because it will eat your time. Now in philosophy, now when I see the phone ring, no offense, I know. When we see it, we see clicks. Being a girl from Canada, when I go into the taxi cab, I can't wait to see New York City, but I've got advertising in my face. Can't even see out of the car. It's everywhere. It's like right there. We have lotus eaters everywhere. Push notifications. Check out this. We have people telling us to go. Everyone is telling us to go to the island. Go live on the island. Now, economically, I was like, okay, if I live on the island, will I make more money? I wanted to know. If we all put our businesses on there, and if we're all there shouting, aren't we all just standing around the Grand Canyon yelling at each other? Who would actually see what? How would we actually get any information through? How do we know that it's true? And what would actually happen? So I wanted to know if there was an economic part to this. Now, I'm sorry, I'm Canadian, I can put this up because this is your American companies. But it actually, when you put it together, it's called FANG. The thing that's so interesting about FANG to me was, again, going back to the parables, and we talk about David and Goliath. Goliath had 5 brothers. And I always thought, oh, he carried 5 stones, he had 5 brothers, I wonder what that was. Are we living in a time of Goliaths? If we're living in a time of Goliaths, there's got to be more than one. And so when you put them all together, we never leave the grips of FANG, ever. We have Amazon, Apple, Google, Facebook. We never leave this island. So it's Homer's with a lotus eater, with FANG and David and Goliath. And all of us are really David. So I wanted to know if it actually economically has happened. So in the last 10 years, or since 2018, you can now see 26 people in the whole world. 5 of them, well actually like most of them are here, but like 5 of those companies are in that 26, own the bottom 50% of the whole world's money. Gone. In the last 10 years. Gone. Their money, gone. Went whoom, to the top. So now I think Homer was warning us. I think that he was cautioning us to be careful of the lotus eater. Because not only will they take our time, they'll take our money. Now, the bottom half, when you look at the demographics of those that spend time there, are children, kids, people from lower income neighborhoods, people that don't have as much but are hoping for something. Because we've been fed that if you go there, that maybe you can be famous too. You can build your business there, you can build your life there, you can connect there. But really, what's happened is we've wasted a lot of time there. So now we got to do something about it. So now we can talk about the solution. If I haven't totally finished, I'm so sorry. So how do we navigate this bridge? This is something I've pondered a lot about because I've tried to see the good in it. I've been a tech entrepreneur, I've raised money, I've lived in Silicon Valley. I was stunned that more of my peers weren't talking about this on a more rapid level. And coming then from the healing world and addiction and growing up with just my mom on the streets, I thought, we have to be able to get this message out, but there's got to be something that can be good about it. There's got to be some good in it, right? So I decided to come up with a little bit of the filters. So there's 5 filters that I think that you should put on every single thing that you do within the world of digital. 5 filters, and if they don't hit this 5-point scale, you're out. Don't buy it, don't give it your time, don't do any of that. It's like the 5 things that you need to just say, does it do these 5 things for you, your family, and your kids? And if it doesn't, get out, because they're doing something else to you. So the number 1 is safety verification and authentication. Safety means filters, language filters. Language filters. Does the system where you go have language filters that picks out the language and can actually let you know is if your child types something, can it let you know that there's a danger here? Can it filter the cyberbullying? Can it filter out the language? You can put those on things as well. It's so important. Your kids do not need to hear mean things. The days of it treating kids well, where we could be resilient and tougher, are gone. Our old school self is gone. It's too pervasive now. It's too constant. It's too hurtful now. It's too much. They don't need to hear that. So you need to be in spaces where you can verify that these are in fact humans that your kids should talk to. If you don't think that your child should go to the mall by themselves at 8 years old and talk to everybody in there and get into their car and have supper, then not a place for them. It's quite simple. If you can't authenticate who your children are talking to, they probably shouldn't be talking to them. It's just a simple rule. This is a tricky one. When it comes to everything else in our life, coming to this program, the schools that you choose in this, the doctors you go to, the food you eat, how many of you are filter, like you go through it? You read the food labels. Who reads food labels here now? We do, because we want to make sure that they reflect our values. The world of digital is absolutely no different. If the spaces where you go and it takes your child's data and they give it advertising, if you're okay with that and it matches your family values, so be it. But if it doesn't, then move or pay. It's super simple. It needs to reflect your family and your values. Because unlike the other addictive substances where we got to use the rule, you can have a drink when you're 19, we can't say that here, can we? Because we have parents who have an Instagram account beside their kids who have an Instagram account. And when I ask parents to give up their Instagram account, they leave. So we can't do the whole like do as I say, not as I do thing. It doesn't work here. So you need a different filter in order to actually govern the spaces you're in. Delay, delay, delay gratification. Delay, delay, and then delay some more. The Road Less Traveled is a really great book if you ever get a chance to read it. M. Scott Peck, he specifically talked about that delaying gratification is a key part of how we should all live. How many of us delay anything now? We don't even wait for a taxi because we got Uber. We don't have to wait for food. I used to get very excited for Thursday nights and Friends. And how many people would be so excited? Like, is Ross and Rachel gonna marry? Are they gonna kiss? What's gonna happen? And then Seinfeld was on right after. And everyone had to watch the final Seinfeld episode because there was no way to tape it. See, I'm dating myself. You couldn't tape it. You had to be there. You had to see it. But it created anticipation for our life. It created awareness and presence, like this present moment is going to be the most magnificent moment in the whole wide world. And we got so excited for it. And increasingly, we got number and number and number and number and number. And now we binge watch and binge watch. If you ask anybody after they watch 10 episodes of their favorite show, what happened in those 10 episodes, they cannot tell you. They can tell you the first and maybe the last and nothing in between. We're not even registering any of it. We're just going automatic pilot, which is actually changing our brains. So this is a 2-to-1 ratio. We use this in my house. For every hour of digital that we do in the house, we do 2 hours of real life. So if the kids want an hour, then I get 2. So that's the barter system that we use in ours. We do 2 hours of real life, which generally involves me talking, which really is ad nauseating for them. But you know, it's all good. They're 16 and 12. They're doing all right, and they're doing okay. We go outside, we go for walks. We use a 2-to-1 ratio in the house because it's important that you balance this out. It's really important that there be this balance between that. If it's way over here, then we're in trouble. Whew, this is a tough one. Data protection and privacy. Of course, here in the United States, you guys have had data breaches. It's now hitting the papers. In Canada, we have slightly different privacy laws. But I will say that if you cannot get your data, and if your privacy is not protected, those are spaces you should not be in, especially your kids. I really firmly believe that our kids have a right to forget. We all did. Your grade 12 prom night parties where you were throwing up in the box of the beer, we all know there was no pictures of that stuff. Right? Who remembers that? There was no pictures of that. We got to make mistakes without fear of losing our jobs. We got to learn from our mistakes, and then we got to forgive ourselves for them, and then we got to say goodbye to them. That is not the world that we have right now. So we have to be able to own our privacy and our data, and that needs to be a choice. This is one area I actually think needs to be regulated. Every single system should say it in black and white. I'm going to take your data, are you okay with that? And by the way, you have no privacy here, are you okay with that? And if I say yes, all right, shame on me. If I say no, give me the alternate way to use your system. It's that simple. They can all build it. It's that simple. I don't want you to have my data. I want my privacy. I don't want this sold. No, I don't want the cookies. That should be my right, because it's mine. And just because I go to these spaces doesn't mean that I forego that right. But it's all written in the terms and conditions, so you have to take that back. So the final thing on the solution, and then we'll open it up for questions, is I am a little old school, even though I've been in the tech industry for the last decade. There is nothing more important than you as parents with your kids. In my last tech industry job, running my company, we worked in professional sports, and we surveyed a ton of kids. And when we asked the kids who their heroes were, expecting them to tell us what the teams were, 90% of the kids chose their parents. 90% of the kids chose their parents as the hero. We're so busy trying to live our lives outside of that we forget that we're actually the most important person to those kids. And don't underestimate the teen years. They right now have a complete imbalance between how much peer group they're having and not enough time with you. They have enough with their peer groups. They need to have some dry out time. They need to detox from the peer group. They need to fully detox from the peer group. And they need to have you as the sphere of influence because they actually think you're awesome. I tell my children all the time how awesome I am. They're not convinced. My 16-year-old's like, oh, Mom, please don't say that publicly. I get it, but eventually she'll think I'm awesome. If I say it enough times, then maybe it will actually sink in. So please don't underestimate that some of these old school things that we used to have in our lives, we need to bring them back into balance. We can't get rid of the device, but we can change our relationship with it. Relationships are very simple. You put things in balance, and you equalize the power. So if you do not have an equal relationship with your phone, and if you feel it has too much power, then that's a relationship you need to change. Super simple. Thank you.
Do you have any questions? Yes. Would you mind standing up because we don't have another mic, or shall I come to you?
Yeah.
Do you have another mic?
How are you keeping time with your 16-year-old?
That's an excellent question. My 16-year-old is a fascinating character. Sometimes I believe that she was dropped off by the mailman. We have a rule in the house about Shaya's time with her real life time. So I can see almost instantly if she's had too much time, and you probably can all see that with your kids. They're very moody. They really are unhappy. She comes down to the kitchen, and she will always open up the fridge and start to look to eat. Then that's when I really know she's had too much time. That's when she starts to tell me that she's ugly. That's when she tells me that she doesn't look like the other girls. Then I know that she's had too much time. One of the things with our kids is we don't believe the phone should ever go to bed with them. Not even for an alarm clock. They do have these little magical things for like $6.99 at Walmart that you can plug into the wall and it goes beep, beep, beep. Those really work well. They don't need a phone in their bedroom. And so Shia hated it at first, But now she's kind of gotten used to it, and most of them know, which means that sometimes when she leaves Snapchat open on my phone, that I'm getting the pings in the middle of the night because I forgot to delete it, because I delete it off the phone every time it shows up. But the biggest thing with Shia and with the kids, with my 16-year-old in particular, is I decided that it was more important for me, instead of like monitoring her all the time, was to have a real relationship. And I was okay with not being in her spaces, so I thought it was ridiculous to follow our kids all over the internet. So I didn't make a Snapchat account, I didn't do the Instagram, I didn't do any of that. I figured, like, that's if you're gonna be with your peers, then you're gonna be with me in happy land of old school, no technology, so that she would have more balance between the two. Yeah.
That's your question. One is there a social media realm out there that fulfills? Is there a social media realm out there that you think fulfills all of your 5 rules? And number 2, and this is more philosophical, but every argument that you made about social media was made about printing press when it came out, about radio when it came out, and about TV when it came out. What's the difference? Is there any?
Yeah, great question. And they were. The difference is we never carried the TV in our pocket. That's like, we never actually carried the big, TV everywhere we went, and we wanted to, but we never did. The amount of time is the pervasiveness and the lack of filters, and also the content that we received. In the 80s, FTC changed the rules around when you could actually see commercials. Reagan actually changed it, so that you could actually get specific content and commercials during supper hours. I don't know if you guys remember when that change happened. Then it happened into Canada as well. And so really in the internet, there's not really a rating system. So it's the type of content, the frequency, the hours that it comes in. A lot of these kids are up till 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, even if you don't know that they are. They're on their snapping all night long. They're into lots of places, especially if they're gaming. And so the main difference is, again, the type and the content and what's actually in our pockets. The other thing that's most fascinating to me is how many parents got took away with it as well. I think that for us, there was always a difference between the habits of parents and their kids. Parents had specific habits. They played cards, probably played bridge, had a drink, and that was sort of their habits, and the kids were doing something differently. But now we have parents and kids doing the exact same thing. That's a big change. The other 5 rules, there is not a place. My last tech company, which is now, I became the chairman, and he's actually taking it over. He's doing a lot of this right now, so he's retooling the tech, so that'll be out. It's going to be called Relly, and he's taken my old Mazoo platform and redoing it. But there is some technology that does fulfill some of this. Signal is a good one. That's a messaging app that you can use. There are some ways for kids to communicate. They just don't know, because all the kids are on Snapchat, so they think they all need to be there. The other biggest thing that's been hard is the fact that the big 5 do control pretty much everything that's going on in that realm. So we're going to have to be really, really clever. I think the other part of it too is like a collaborative approach. I think if we can all begin to agree that there is a problem without a semantic debate, if we kind of say, well, this pie, it's got a problem. So which part of the pie should we all have, parents, industry, and then regulators, and then how can we actually look at this, and what do we think that should be solved? And I think that really needs to happen too.
I think we had a question over here somewhere. Was there someone that raised their hand over here? Yes.
I'm a high school teacher and also a mom of a 17-year-old, a 14-year-old, and a 10-year-old.
Oh, I feel your pain.
And the one-to-one device that is happening in the school where I work, and my kids have Chromebooks, pushes out a lot of screen time, whether you like it or not. So with your 2-to-1 advice, in addition to social media and phones, how do you find the 2-to-1 time when your kids have homework on Google Classroom and so much online screen time that's necessary for academic success?
Yeah, I think it's less about them doing their homework on Google Slides and them spending time on Instagram. I think it's again, we need to really understand what they're doing with the specific device at the time that they're doing it, and then there's usefulness for device time, as opposed to it being the social part of it. The problem is that when you look at the research around even Snapchat or Instagram usage, and you think that during the day or at nighttime it's the busiest, but many of the kids are snapping throughout the whole day. So you teachers are teaching and they're snapping and they're on there and they're not paying attention. Let's just call a spade a spade. Like, they're really not. They're talking. Kids cannot. This whole thing about kids multitasking and being able to do that with co-viewing, I have not met a brilliant child yet that's able to do it. Maybe there's a few Einsteins here in the United States, but as far as I'm concerned, when the kids are snapping, they're not listening. Because it's way more interesting what their peer group is saying. So there's usefulness for when the technology is, but the 2-to-1 ratio is really about entertainment and social. So if your kids are not getting that social interaction with you specifically as the parent, then it's an issue. They need to be with you.
So we have a
Yep.
you
Yep.
answer the question. Okay, we have a. Oh, that's okay. I've got a question from a student here.
What's your opinion on parents going through their child's phone?
Good question. How many parents check their kids' phones? So this goes back to relationship. So like all relationships, even between kids and parents, there is stuff that we need to know, which they're on a need-to-know basis. And then there's things that we have to develop with trust. And so part of where I was first, when my oldest first got the phone, I was like phone, passwords, rifling through, finding it out. And then I found that she was running all over the internet trying to hide me from that. So then she had her Finsta account, and then she went on VSCO. Who's on VSCO here? Anybody on VSCO? You guys know about VSCO? Yeah, you know about VSCO. You know what VSCO's for. Girls are nodding over here. So then I was like, well, now I'm just chasing her all over the internet. Now, if she really has an issue, she may not tell me. And so I approached it from a relationship point of view, that I wanted her to trust me, but I wanted her to understand the rules. Now, it's kind of backfired because I get way too much information that I literally some days will be drinking my own glass of wine just trying to hear the information. But she does tell me a lot of things because of that. And so I think that it's up to the parent to form a relationship with your kids. One of the things is that they're so terrified you're going to take the phone away. And if they're terrified that they're going to take the phone away, they're going to hide from you. And if they hide from you, you don't know, and sometimes you don't know until it's too late. Because it's too strong for them to have. It's too strong of an addiction, these phones. So if there is the threat that it's going to disappear or that you're there, they will go somewhere else. They will hide from you. And then you will chase them all over the internet. And we can't keep up with that. The applications and calculators, the backdoors to Kindles, like there's backdoors for these kids in we couldn't keep up with it, and we were in the tech space. Like there's a lot that's there. So the best thing that you can do is have a relationship with your kids and conversations about it. And then just create very clear rules of what happens if those get violated. And then the rest is really a wing and a prayer.
All right, we have a question back here.
True story.
Hi, do you have any data on the policy of students having phones in school all day long?
Okay, that is a great question. And I think that it does not have an awesome answer, unfortunately. For example, in Canada, all of Ontario has made a law that no phones are allowed in any school at all. So the entire province of Ontario is no phones at all. They have a no phone policy. You would not be surprised how many parents were upset about that. Parents were mad because they said, well, how am I going to talk to my kid in the day? True, it was a true argument. In Canada, which we leave our doors open. And so it was really interesting. Then there is BC, where I'm from, they say they're very progressive and they encourage that all the phones come to school. In fact, they think that all phones should come to school because kids need a calendar. True story. So I, who live in my community, went to my school board and said, this is not a good idea. My kid doesn't even know where the calendar is on this phone. And she's late for everything and misses everything. And she asks her friends on Snapchat what class she has next. Who doesn't do that? That's a true thing that happens, right? What class, what period are we in? You don't look at a calendar. So I think the biggest thing is that we as parents need to understand the relationship that these kids have with their phone. And it's not academic. Like, it's just not. And so the relationship that they have with their phones is not for academic purposes. So you need to decide if your child having the phone at school is a good idea if it helps their academic performance. But the statistics are very clear. Kids spend on average 9 hours a day in social media. Progressive throughout the day, it adds up to 9 hours. So they're not looking on a quiz app for like Trivial Pursuit. They're not. So I don't think it should be in schools.
So you did mention TikTok and a lot of,
Who does the TikTok dance? Do we know the dance?
it's just, so what I've noticed more and more with the kids are where the age of my kids and a little older, once they get together, that's all they do is sort of get together, and then they're just on TikTok and doing their dances, and it's fun and it's social for them when they're together, instead of obviously playing outside or anything like that. But what's your perspective on that, and how much we allow them to continue that?
Well, okay, first of all, how many kids know the TikTok dance that blew up at Christmas time? Do we all know how to do it? Kids, do you want to come and show us the dance real quick so the parents know what you're learning? Okay. So there is a very specific dance that blew up on TikTok, right? I tried to do it in the kitchen with my 12-year-old. I'm terrible at it. There's just no rhyme or reason to it, and how it became famous is just beyond me. I think, again, it's a conversation to have with the parents on a sleepover and play dates. I think that if you as parents can get on the same page, that the phones don't come and the phones aren't going to be in your home, and you all agree to that, they will find other things to do. I assure you. I assure you they will find other things to do on their play dates and fun time. They don't need it. But what happens is one kid brings it, right? And then the one kid brings it, and then the other kids are like, well, Mom, you didn't send me with the phone, and then we have peer pressure amongst us as moms, right? Because we didn't send the phone, and so then they end up congregating. If you're serious about your kids engaging with real-life humans, create rules around when real-life humans needs to transpire. And the things that kids do need to do together is they do need to learn to communicate together, to problem solve together, to play together that don't involve a phone. But they do. They all sit around looking over on YouTube on the latest videos. Now, maybe at an hour at the end of the sleepover when they're all getting tired, maybe that's a time you can say, okay, this can happen. But we need to look at it in the exact same way. So Peyton, my 12-year-old, I do know that her friends have TikTok, but we have a rule as a friend group with the other moms that no phones come to any of the houses. They phone me when it's time to go home, and no phones come for sleepovers. So, true story, we still have all the Barbies set up in the one room, and they play board games, and they draw, and they are loud, and they do put music on, and they create air bands, and they're dancing and they're singing. But they still have some of the same things as well.
What do you think an appropriate age is for a kid to have a phone?
Ah, great question. Well, 30-something? The rule used to be 16 once they start to drive, like once you start to drive. Well, in Canada, it was for protection if you ever got caught in a snowstorm. You needed to be able to call it a tow truck, so that's why you'd have a phone. You know, if it were up to me, kids wouldn't have social media till after 18. If I was the regulator, I wouldn't allow kids in social media at all till after 18, until after their emotional development is done. Their emotional development of the brain, as you know, doesn't stop until after their 18th and 19th birthday, till 20, is it 25? 25. And so emotionally is where these kids are getting hammered into these spaces. Like that's where they're really getting hurt, is emotionally. And so they're getting these devices and they're just not equipped for what is emotionally happening to them. And that part of the brain isn't fully developed yet. So in an ideal world, if we could turn back time, I think 18 is the perfect number. That they really don't need one prior to that. Really, for being honest.
So Janice, you were just talking about emotional development, but we talk a lot, or some of my friends and I are talking a lot about self-regulation. I'm hearing that self-regulation doesn't really develop until after 18, and I think in some cases early 20s. And if that is the case, it's a wonder why we're expecting our own children who are gaming and playing video games on TikTok. how we're actually expecting them to sort of self-regulate themselves when they do not have the ability. Is that true?
100%. Like, that's not, you're asking kids to do something that they're not capable of doing. Like, their brains aren't there. The way that this is built, from a technical side, from the tech startup industry, again, not to be an extremist, but half of them should be in jail just for what they've done to kids. Just for what they've done to kids, because it's wired and hacked their brains. And so, you know, you can't expect them to do this, especially in self-regulation. Again, when you take all the different theories and you put them together as a perfect storm, it's an impossibility. Look at how hard we have as adults sorting our stuff out. We're still dealing with stuff that we had to deal with when we were 10. It's still there for us. Now, these are little people. How many parents here fully self-regulate their cell phone use? Let's be honest. Not a chance. Not a chance.
I have a couple questions. Hang on.
Are we losing out on an opportunity to help them learn how to self-regulate by micromanaging?
That's why I think it's rules around social media versus being in the spaces with them to micromanage it. It's more about realizing that your kids need to detox. Like, they literally need to detox out of these spaces for time periods where they get boredom, when they get to go back into the body. That's where their spirit is, and not to get philosophical, but we all have a soul. We have our intuition. When we were young, we were taught to listen to that. What does your gut say? You know how that used to happen? We used to say, what does your gut say? If we say that to kids now, they'd be like, hungry? Gassy? Had McDonald's? So we don't actually create opportunities for kids to actually detangle from it, to move into the body, to learn that part of it. Part of self-regulation is to understand who you are. And part of that is also to then learn your soul, to learn your intuition, to learn who you are. And that can't happen in these spaces. It's too busy.
So, would you recommend for, you know, the high schooler, 16-year-old again, and yours, you know, I totally don't believe in self-regulation at this age, whereas my husband's like, no, she needs to learn how to do it. And I'm like, take the phone from 6, well, she doesn't go to bed with it, but I'm like, she can't do homework, math, and have the phone outside of her.
It's true.
So, would you recommend, okay, you know, it's time for homework, let's put the phone away from 6 to 9.
Yeah.
From 9 to 9:30 you can have it, and then actually it goes in our room.
Yes.
Because we've caught, you know, there is no way she's going to be off of it at night. So since she's been in 7th grade, it's been in our room with the Mac.
Well
with
done.
The computer.
Well done, and you were right.
So
like
should
many
we
mothers
take the
are.
phone away during homework?
Absolutely. There should be no phone during homework. Like kids are not that different than when we were kids. When we were kids, could we do that well? Let's be honest. No, we put the TV on and we tried to study, and then we're like, oh, what page should I just read? And we'd have to go back and reread the page because we would get lost in that part of it. The relationship with digital is very, very clear. We have to be aware of it and treat it in a relationship way. In very much the same way that we regulate food, alcohol intake, anything else, how much we sleep. The phone is not just a tool. It's just not just sitting there. It's not used as a tool anymore. So you were absolutely right. Especially this age, one of the things that was most shocking to me was the amount of college kids have a 40% decrease in empathy now. That's data based here in the United States. It's a device. Yeah, it's a total device. And what was so surprising to me about the data and the lack of empathy is that these kids started this social media generation, are now in college. So if we're really concerned if you have school-age kids, the data is clear of what could happen to them once they go into college. The empathy, the human connection is it's just not there.
Janice, I have a question. What do you feel about technology in schools in general, being that kids are using computers in schools, and then they're using them at home to do their homework and not actually writing, being that they're on it all the time. Is that part of your Pavlov theory?
Yeah, I think that, I understand the usefulness of Google, Classroom. Like, I get it. It's super useful. It's really handy. So there's times where using these places can be useful. My girls we have a rule. They all have to have a journal. So my girls literally have to write every night. It's a journal practice. I do it. My husband does it. The girls do it. And they physically write in a book. Because I figure if they're not going to get penmanship anywhere else, then at least they can get it when they journal. And I have to tell you that at first they were super resistant, but now my girls are like, it's journal time. And sometimes I'll be busy and they'll remind me it's journal time, so that we can create opportunities for tactile. I think that we traded this all for nothing idea. Like, all technology is going to be great. Let's get rid of all of those old, spelling books and tracing and writing and, and phonetics, like proper sort of some of that. We got rid of everything, where I'm not sure that that's wise. I think we need to have a balance between this new technology and some of the old school.
Thank you. I think we'll take one more question. Do we have anyone else? Yes.
Oh, thank you. Have you heard the Wait Until 8th pledge?
I heard about it today here.
We've been talking about that in general. So
Wait until the kids are 8 before they get a cell phone?
8th grade.
Oh, 8th grade, even better.
8th grade, so I guess that's what,
Yeah.
or 13. Well, I'm not there yet. And I'm all for it.
Yeah.
I heard you say earlier that you have a friend group, and you're all on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
And you are all in agreement, the phones are left at home. Was that difficult for you to get that friend group?
It was, because, and in many cases, lots of parents that were dealing with their own attachment issues, which I had to educate them on, that they don't need to talk to their kids 10 times in a night, that they'll be fine. But I think that what's happened is that if we have to be honest about this as parents, is that we ourselves have our own wounds and our own stuff from our own past that we're dealing with that become activated when we have children. And so we say, oh, I will never do what my mother did. I'm going to be so much better than my mother. I never got this. And so when we have these kids, we bring that to them. The toughest part of this is that the kids were actually going to be just fine. If we as parents can become parents again, where we don't need to talk to our kids in the middle of the day. Unless they fell off the monkey bars and broke their arm, I really don't care. I'm assuming that they're doing well. I'm assuming that the teachers are doing a good job. I don't need to micromanage that. If they go on a sleepover and I go to the door and I shake a hand and I know the parents and we say, hey, I'm like, phone me in the morning, but not too early because I don't have kids. Keep them till noon. If you keep them till noon, even better, because then I can sleep in. We have to get a better balance with us as parents, with our kids. We've got this closet around them and we're clawing around them, and they need to have that freedom in some ways to actually grow and learn. But it's mostly parents that are having the issue with it, not the kids. If you took the kids away on a sleepover, the first one they maybe say something, the second one they can't wait to get back to your house. My kitchen's a mess because they bake. They have their own cook-offs. My kitchen is a disaster zone from the 12-year-olds that have been through that, but who cares, right? They're having a good time.
Janice, what do you feel about FaceTime and kids talking and FaceTiming? How are you with that?
I'm actually okay with FaceTime in some cases because at least they're having a conversation and there's language. So when we were kids, you'd have to answer the phone and I say, hi, my name is Janice, how can I help you? And then my mother would say, ask to take a message, and okay, let's do this again, and you'd get coached on how to answer the phone. So I think in this case, at least that some of that social cues that is really important for kids to learn. I don't know if any of you now go to any fast food restaurants where teenagers are there. I'm not sure what's happened to manners and to basic communication skills, but they are out the window. And then I hired a bunch of staff and I fired a bunch of staff because the basic things like looking up when someone walks through the door to say hello, gone. These are things that, despite my age and our age, these things will never go out of style. Never. They will never go out of style. And so the more that we can be that for our kids, look, the reality is this, is that we have to do this. because we are one of the last generations of parents that actually knew a time before this. Because there is a whole generation of parents that are growing up with digital that don't understand the differences. And so I think it's incumbent upon us to actually have that.